And we're live.
We are. Welcome, everybody, to the 6th Big East Coast podcast. Probably going to get going on a more regular basis here out of necessity because season is right around the corner. And we have, we were going to do this Friday. And that whole East Coast internet thing happened, and I didn't know who would be able to watch it. It didn't affect me personally, but I didn't know who would be able to watch it, and it was just easier to not do it.
Plus, there were problems with SB Nation and whatnot. I didn't personally experience any of them, but it was best to just play it safe.
Yeah.
But yeah, we'll probably have more of these during the week now, a little bit more frequently because we need to get them done before the season starts next month.
Yeah.
Rob over here with his Slack notifications being loud.
I know. Well, in case anyone hears that and it hurts your ears or whatever, you can talk to Alex Sindelar for blowing up the Slack chat.
You just gotta mute your notifications.
Yeah, I closed out of it. Anyway.
Well, you don't have the Slack app to begin with. You, for some reason, still go with the desktop, which is dumb.
Anyway, we're going to talk about Providence, but as we are accustomed to in the first couple minutes, decent amount of Big East news in the last week.
There has been.
I think the biggest would probably be Tremont Waters to Georgetown.
Yep. Way has landed a very talented recruit out of, let me see, where's Tremont Waters?
Connecticut. South Kent.
Right, yeah. South Kent, Connecticut. 5'9", 140-pound point guard. 4-star recruit, second best player in the state of Connecticut per 24/7 Sports' this lists him as a New York recruit right now. So he's behind Hamidou Diallo. So they're a little bit off on that. But
yeah.
Nonetheless, Waters picked Georgetown over the likes of Indiana. I think Kentucky was in on him as well. There's a few other, notable high major programs. But John Thompson III has his point guard.
Yeah.
Has been much needed for the past few years, really. If you really take the time to think about it. I mean, obviously DSR was a decent ball handler, but not your atypical point guard, even though of course basketball's kind of shifting away from that, so to speak. But nonetheless, it's plays that position and probably plays it pretty well. So Georgetown finally gets what they've been craving and looking for the past couple of years now, going on, I don't know, quite a while, I would say.
And then the other big thing was Ken Pom updated last night for the 2016-17 season.
Yep, it did. And
I mean, that's something we'll get more into Providence specifically through the duration of this. But just a couple things off the bat. Villanova is number 2 after finishing number 1 last year. I mean, you could argue that Villanova should be number 1 because just going off this, I mean, Duke's got the offense, but their defense is a heavy drop-off.
Well, yeah, but as you can see from that, and for those of you who haven't checked it out, Duke's adjusted offensive efficiency is at 120.8, and which basically means that they would be scoring 120.8 points per 100 possessions with, adjusted for opponent. And then Villanova is number 2 at 116.3. So there's a pretty big difference in between those two teams. For the record, the record amount of points in that, I believe, was it was set by Wisconsin back when they made the national championship game. Their adjusted offensive efficiency was 127.
Yeah.
Which was pretty ridiculous. And I know Duke in 2014 had a mark of 124.1, and Michigan the year prior had 120.2, which I believe – no, it was not, because Missouri had a good record the year they lost to Norfolk State. We won't go into that too much. So, yeah, a bit of a big gap between those teams. And I guess it kind of makes sense But certainly Villanova and their offense will be expected to be great again. I don't know if it's going to be as efficient as they were on their ridiculous national championship run, but they're going to be good, and they're going to be good defensively as they are often to be.
And all 10 Big East teams are projected to start the year 1-0.
They are.
So, speaking of the Big East, you got Xavier at 11. Butler at 19 was a little bit surprising, but if you look into it, it's not too surprising.
Correct, and you'll see a post on this later today, maybe by the time that this podcast is released, about my KenPom observations. He usually bases his formulas in the preseason, and of course, they're always, as always, just a disclaimer, it's not obviously an exact science, especially the preseason rankings with pretty much anybody. Everything needs to be crude. I know Russ Steinberg had said that, Russ Steinberg of a dime back in Mid-Major Madness and SB Nation in general. But so two of the factors that go into this are quote-unquote inertia, so how good a team has been leading up to this point, and based on what they've done in the past, will usually project how they do in the future, and also returning personnel. And I would say about 80% of Butler's projected starting lineup are all returning players from last year, between Tyler Lewis, Tyler Weidman, Keelan Martin, and Andrew Stravis, with possible addition of Keithan Savage if they decide to put him at the 2. So, and considering how good Butler's offense was last year, and considering that they have Martin, who's expected to take a big leap after his prodigious production toward down the stretch last year, it's not crazy to suggest that this team will be very good offensively and very good defensively as well, which is why they're where they're at now.
And if you look at it from the terms of Villanova and Xavier in the top 15, they're definitely in the tournament.
Mm-hmm.
Butler, Georgetown, Creighton are the next 3. They're probably in. I mean, you could see 2 or 3 of them making it. And then Seton Hall is right below at 38. And then you got Marquette at 47 and Providence at 63, and they might, find themselves on the bubble this year. You can see it.
Yeah, exactly. And, people might be, a little bit agitated that Georgetown's thought of a bit more highly than Seton Hall. But I guess the expectation is that a team littered with juniors and seniors in Georgetown is probably not going to be unsuccessful, because that's usually the mantra of, okay, if you have a lot of returning personnel, which Georgetown does, they only lost DSR. And yes, DSR was good, but he is like the only player that they lost from last year. They returned everybody else.
Yeah. Yeah.
So if you take that into account, and you take into account the fact that, they've been all right, not, great, but they've been all right, then you can see why. And even when you look at it, they're projected to be 10-8, and Seton Hall is projected to be 9-9 in the Big East. So you're pretty much splitting hairs. Georgetown's projected record is at 18-11, and Seton Hall's projected record is at 17-11.
And
which doesn't include the tournaments and stuff like that. So
the biggest surprise to me, and we'll actually talk about this more because they play Providence, Ohio State is at 13 right now, and that seems kind of ridiculous. And again, we'll get more into it when we start breaking down Providence's schedule here.
I guess what the deal is, there, and if you look at Ohio State's roster from last year, I don't think they lost anybody going into this year. Let me check their verbal commits page. I know we're talking about the Big Ten on a Big East podcast, but it was one of the big things that I noticed from this KenPom list. No, they barely lost anybody from last year. Everyone's a year older, and I guess it's taking stock in the fact that they finished as the 43rd defense in the country from adjusted defensive efficiency standpoint. And they're going to take a leap defensively, and I guess their offense won't be as average as it was last year.
Yeah.
So I guess the computer likes what they see from Ohio State based on returning personnel, which they brought back pretty much everybody, and that they won't. And this goes back to the inertia thing, I guess. Ohio State, up until last year, And even, I guess, the year before no, not the year before, because they went 24-11, made the NCAA tournament. Up until last year, they had been good, if not very good.
Yeah.
So the expectation is, okay, Ohio State is going to, be better than most teams in the Big Ten. So you figure, okay, was last year just an anomaly? Maybe. So that's why they're thought of pretty highly. I can see it from that standpoint, and obviously, based on what they did last year, and all of a sudden they're in the top 13. It's like, that's weird.
Yeah.
But looking at that, for play devil's advocate, that's my thought process. Do I think they're going to be that good? I don't think so.
Yeah.
But, we'll let everything play out.
And then just one more Providence-related thing. Ben Bentil signed with the Pacers today, so
He did.
Hopefully he can find a role. I think Boston was just kind of a crowded situation for him, and
definitely.
Yeah. So all right. So I said we'd go a little bit long at the beginning today. We'll go a little bit long at the end, also with baseball and wrestling. But now, just to get into it, Providence. They lost a couple players last year that you may or may not be familiar with.
That they did. One player we just mentioned in Ben Bentil, and also Chris Dunn, who turned out to be a lottery pick in the NBA draft. He's now a Minnesota Timberwolves. So they're going to be playing from behind from that standpoint, but they are bringing back pretty much everybody else. Kyron Cartwright, Rodney Bullock, Jalen Lindsey, and let me check their scholarship page to make sure that I'm accurate in saying that.
Ryan Fazekas is coming back and free of mono this year.
Yes, he is. Everybody. I was about to name Junior Lamamba, but then I remembered that he left. So
he did. He transferred.
Yes. So he's no longer there, but they were able to get a few transfers in. One being Isaiah Jackson, who we had talked to at Big East Media Day. He's coming in from George Mason, I think it was.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and they also got JUCO transfer Emmett Holt, who was formerly of Indiana, who had attended Indian Hills Community College. I know that because I had looked up Tredarius McCollum, who I had written something about today. And back when you wrote about him committing to DePaul, you had mentioned the fact that Holt had committed to Providence, and he was the second Big East recruit to commit to a Big East school from that community college in Indiana.
Yeah.
So they have them, and we've got a couple good freshmen that we've profiled. And now we have a guest joining us, Chris Grenham. Chris, can you hear us?
Yep. You guys hear me good?
Yep.
Awesome.
All right. So in case you're unfamiliar, Chris Grenham had joined us recently as one of our new additions for the 2016-2017 season. We have quite a lot of Providence people on our site, which is always nice. So, Chris, right now we're basically just scratching the surface of what Providence lost last year and what they're gaining this year. But going into last year, pretty successful campaign, I guess you could say.
Yeah, definitely successful. I think it was way above anyone else's expectations because coming into the season, it was sort of it was the Chris show, and Ben was almost an afterthought. He had a good freshman campaign, but he was not expected to do nearly as much as he did last year. So that was a nice improvement.
Definitely. And they had started off 14-1. They got a big win over Arizona. They played Michigan State pretty tightly back in the Wooden Legacy tournament, of course. And then Big East play, it went well for them, but they were, I guess the word would be somewhat inconsistent, I guess you could say.
Yeah, inconsistent was definitely the motto across the board. And that kind of came up more with the depth. There was a lack of depth in last year's team, which will be a nice improvement this year. This team's not nearly as skilled as last year, but they're definitely deeper. But the inconsistency started coming up towards the end of the non-conference schedule. There's a couple close games with Bryant and Ryder that probably shouldn't have been as close as they were. There was a couple guys that got sick. That was right around when Fazekas got sick, and from that point on, it was pretty choppy. I know it was a Marquette loss that kind of started the trend in Big East play, but inconsistency was unfortunately a pretty big trend.
Definitely. Probably
Yeah, I mean, you had I know Dunn missed a couple games with the flu. I know Bentel had the ankle problems more than once with something that popped up. So, and now just going into this year, being without those guys, and you talked about the depth. I mean, I think first and foremost, is there any concern about obviously trying to replace two guys that went to the NBA?
Yeah, I mean it's impossible to ignore that. That was the majority of our offense last year was Ben and Chris, and obviously losing two guys to the draft is two important pieces of your program. So it's tough, but with a team it's kind of a transition period almost, but there's a lot of quality guys that are still coming back. Kyron Cartwright, Jalen Lindsey, Rodney Bullock. That's not a bad group to have filling in for big pieces like Ben and Chris. But it'll be interesting to see how they step up with guys like Rodney Bullock and Jalen Lindsey. Inconsistency was a huge problem for them. Rodney, the game against Butler on, I think it was New Year's Eve, goes for 25 plus points and has a great game, and then next couple of games he'll just disappear. So having him become a consistent scorer is going to be important for this team's success. And guys like Jalen and Kyron are under the same microscope, I would say.
Among those three, who do you think has the biggest chance to really emerge and put themselves on the map in the conference and in the country, even if Providence gets to that point?
I would like to say Rodney. I think he has the most tools to do so, but I just don't really see that happening. I think Kyron Cartwright is most likely the one to emerge on the scene. I think he's a great point guard, and learning under Chris Dunn for a couple years is definitely is not a bad thing. And he got a lot of time last year, even with Chris on the roster, especially when Chris was sick towards the end of December. And I think he played pretty well. And now, he's the quarterback of the offense now. So we'll see early on. There's a couple tough games like you guys were talking about earlier with Ohio State, and they're playing in one of their early season tournaments down in Florida. So we'll see. But I think Kyron Cartwright has the most potential to burst onto the scene, I would say.
I would definitely tend to agree with that, to be honest.
Yeah, and I think physique is coming back is a pretty big thing too. They had some struggles shooting the three ball last year, and he's definitely someone that could improve on that.
Yeah, I think the three ball is going to be really important. Prior to him getting, he went down with the mono for a while, and prior to that, he was playing pretty well. He was shooting the ball pretty consistently, which was a nice addition. This team has struggled with that over the last couple of years. There's been a lot of issues shooting the three. So if Jalen and Physiquis can consistently perform from beyond the arc, that will be a huge, huge part of this team finding any sort of success.
Yeah, and then just to go into the recruiting class this year, it's not a bad class. I mean, you got a couple JUCO guys coming in, you got a couple transfers coming in, and then I think
White, and then Alpha Diallo and Khalif Young as well.
Yeah. It's not a bad class at all. It improved immensely late in the recruiting period. That's when Alpha Diallo came on, and towards the end of the recruiting season, it was kind of a battle between Marquette and Providence for Khalif Young, and I think that's the most underrated guy in this class. He doesn't get a lot of hype. He's coming out of Canada. He had a nice circuit towards the end of his recruiting period, and I think that boosted his stock a lot. And I think that's a nice get for Providence, alongside of Emmett Holt, who's another guy who can play the four and hopefully help the Friars underneath. He played at Indiana for a year and then took a year off and played JUCO, and now he's back in Division I. So hopefully he can stand out. And obviously Alpha Diallo is the big prime prospect in this recruiting class out of Brewster Academy, and hopefully it won't take too long, because they could certainly use his scoring punch this year with losing Chris and Ben.
So I know that Khalif Young is 6'9", listed at 250 pounds right now. But Providence, one of their other issues last year was the fact that they were pretty average at best, I guess, at rebounding. And the roster as it shakes out right now, they don't have anyone who's listed at 6'9" or higher. Do you foresee that being an issue for them again this year, even though, it won't be for too long, obviously, since they have some help coming along the way in 2017. But for 2016, do you see rebounding being another thing that possibly plagues them right now?
Yeah, I think it definitely could be. They were forced to run small a decent amount last year. Losing Pascal Chukwu to a late transfer to Syracuse really hurt them. So going into last year, Ben Bentil and Rodney Bullock were their two main rebounders, and that's tough because those are two guys who are in the 6'7", 6'8" range, and that's not ideal with those are guys who can run the floor. So you don't really want to plug them underneath, but they were forced to do that, and that was definitely a struggle. And I think that could happen again this year. But it's nice having guys like Khalif Young and Emmett Holt, who I think will be a little more effective underneath the hoop than Rodney and Ben were last year. But it definitely helps having those two. But I think that could still plague them. But it's nice to be able for Cooley and his staff to look towards next year and have guys like DeHar Dickens and Nate Watson coming in. That'll completely change the motto of this team, and they could run a pretty large lineup if guys like Bullock were to come back.
And I'm glad you named Dickens' name, because I would have totally butchered that.
Yeah, that's a tough one.
Yeah. But yeah, and I know that it certainly became a problem for them when they ran into North Carolina last year. I'm looking at the box score on KenPom, and their UNC's offensive and defensive rebounding percentages blew Providence out of the water.
Yeah, it was pretty ugly. Yeah.
Yeah. So again, if you're just tuning in here, we're talking to Chris Grenham, one of our many Providence writers here on our Providence Season Preview podcast. Rob, do you want to talk about their schedule now? I believe that's where you would be in terms of.
Yeah. Well, off the bat, like I said, all 10 Big East teams are favored in their first game. According to KenPom, Providence opens with Vermont at home. And then really they got one of the most intriguing Gavitt games when they go to Columbus to face an Ohio State team that I think everyone thinks is a little overrated already, just going off KenPom. And I mean, if they're 13 there, they're probably going to be in the top 25 to start the year in terms of the AP poll. So, I mean, Providence has a chance for a big win right off the bat.
Yeah, I think that's going to be a real measure game for them. It's tough. There's kind of a split, in my opinion at least, there's kind of a split opinion on Ohio State, because coming into the offseason, I think they went 21-13, 21-14, something like that last year. So they're kind of they were being seen as a Big Ten sleeper pick, but clearly now with these KenPom rankings coming out, they're not being overlooked at all. But they brought in a couple good big men, I know, and they didn't lose many guys at all last year. So that'll be the toughest test right off the bat for Providence. But there's a couple sneaky games in Providence's non-conference schedule that could really sneak up on them. Vermont's not a tough game to open up against. They always have those URI, Brown, Boston College local games that they open up against, and they're not easy. URI, I think, will probably be one of their toughest games in their non-conference schedule, but certainly Ohio State is the marquee game out of that lineup.
I think what intrigues me about that Ohio State game, I'm looking at Buckeyes roster right now. They do have one 7-footer in Trevor Thompson, a junior from Indianapolis, who originally was at Virginia Tech. But aside from him, the roster isn't that big. They have a couple guys listed at like 6'8" and 6'9", Mark Loving and David Bell. But aside from them, it can lean into Providence's favor if they decide to attack Thompson and get him into foul trouble. I mean, I know we're looking way ahead into that, but that's a matchup that I think can still play in Providence's favor if they get the right bounces.
Yeah, I was noticing that too when I was looking at their roster. I could see that as a game that could quickly turn into a run and gun type matchup, especially if their lone 7-footer gets into any sort of foul trouble. I'm sure Cooley would love to sucker them into a pretty fast-paced game, and that could lean into Providence's favor for sure. I know Kyron Cartwright likes to run a fast-paced offense. I'm not sure if Cooley's in favor of that, but he's a pretty quick player. So if they could get into a run and gun with Ohio State, hopefully that could lean in their favor.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and I think they play in one of the better Thanksgiving tournaments too, in terms of the Big East. I think They're in Florida somewhere, right?
Yeah, it's the Emerald Coast Classic,
Yeah.
I believe it's called.
Yeah, I know they opened against Memphis, which is good.
That's a good matchup. And then I think if they were to win against Memphis, the winner of the Memphis Providence game plays the winner of Iowa Virginia, I believe it is. So it's a good lineup.
Yeah. No, and there's a lot of room for good wins on the schedule because I think people are going to be overlooking Providence this year because they lost Dunn, they lost Bentel, and a lot of chances to make some statements even against Rhode Island, who's going to be a pretty decent team this year.
URI is going to be a very good team this year. I honestly think that's in the top 2 or 3 toughest games in that schedule because that's, especially in the state of Rhode Island, that's a huge game. Wherever it is, last year was at URI, this year it's at the Dunkin' Donuts Center in Providence. It's always a pretty ruckus crowd, and URI was a team they had lost their best player, E.C. Matthews, their star point guard last year early, lost him due to injury for the entire season, and Providence still was forced to only win on a buzzer beater. So that's always a good matchup, so I think that'll be a pretty tough game. But yeah, there's a lot of opportunity for the Friars to have a couple statement wins here and hopefully prove the Big East preseason poll wrong.
Yeah. I know KenPom has them at 16-14 this year, which, that's not a bad place to be in terms of projections because you get a couple more wins along the way. Suddenly you're looking at 18.
Yeah, 16-14 is not a bad projection. I've heard worse. For sure, but I think if you can squeeze out a couple of these non-conference games, maybe find a win you maybe weren't projected to win here or there, then you could be knocking on the door of 20 wins, and potentially sneaking in. So you never know. And
I know no one at Big East Media Day from Providence was pleased with their projection. So they're gonna be mad all year.
Yeah, that seems to be the motto so far in the preseason. It seems as though they're feeling rather disrespected, which is not a bad thing. You're losing guys like Chris and Ben, so any motivation is good motivation. And being projected at the 9 spot, I don't think they like that at all, which they shouldn't. And hopefully it'll help them in the long run. It'll give them some motivation throughout the year.
Yeah.
I personally thought the 9 spot for them. I know they're going to obviously have a little bit of a dovetail from losing 2 guys to the pros, but I think 9th is a little excessive, especially. And I know, St. John's is expected to be better, but there's still, I feel like, a little bit of unknown when it comes to them. We don't know how they're going to project this year, but there's a lot of, known commodities on the Friars in Cartwright and Bullock and Lindsay and company. So I think that.
Yeah, I'm a little biased, of course, but I think 9's a little ridiculous. I trust Providence's current roster definitely more than I trust St. John's. I could even see Providence knocking on the 7th door. I'm a little unsure of Marquette as well. They're relying heavily on guys like Tracy Carter and his supporting cast, so they could fluctuate a couple spots as well. So I know preseason rankings are just that. They're only projections, but I definitely see Providence finishing above the 9 spot.
Plus, I think right now, this is no disrespect to him or anything like that. We know how good of a coach Ed Cooley is, and we don't know quite yet about Chris Mullin, even though he was obviously handed a tough deck last year. But we know how good he is.
Right. Yeah. So that'll be interesting to see how Cooley deals with this. I think he's going to take advantage of this depth for sure because as good as last year's Providence team was, they did not have that depth at all. There was a large gap in the scoring after Bentil and Dunn. It fell off the board. So I think he'll be able to use this depth, and hopefully a couple of the young guys like Diallo and Khalif Young and Malik White can really step up and help him out.
Yeah. It's like you guys said, it's really, I wouldn't want to bet against Ed Cooley, especially after the last 4 years. I know it's probably one of the, at least on paper, not the best roster he's had. Obviously you had LaDontae Henton for a while and then went right to Chris Dunn, right to Ben Bentil, but I would not want to bet against Ed Cooley.
Yeah, I think I think you're correct in saying that. I definitely would not want to either. And And like Chris was saying before, I trust him more than Chris Mullen. We have yet to really see what Chris Mullen can do. Doesn't really have a lot of cards at his favor. But it'll be interesting to see how Rodney Bullock and Jalen Lindsey really step up, because guys like Cartwright and those two are really going to be the leaders of this team. And if you look across the board, it's a relatively young team spread out. The only senior technically on paper is Casey Woodring, and he's a locker room guy and all, but it's going to be looked at for Rodney Bullock and Kyron Cartwright to be the leaders on this team.
You got over here?
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. Cool.
Yeah. So I think we could probably we could look at the Big East schedule, just because it's a tough start. They got to go to Xavier and then to Butler, and I mean those are two of your tougher places to play. I believe they're 6-0 against Butler though in Butler's 3 years in the Big East.
Yeah, they've performed pretty well against Butler as of late, but that's a tough back-to-back to start off their Big East schedule.
Yeah, and then to come home, play Georgetown and Creighton. That it doesn't get any easier. But after that, I mean, you get DePaul. Their schedule, especially in the conference, it's set up a lot harder than some other teams we've seen.
Yeah, it definitely is. It's kind of spread out, but it's certainly not easy. You get a couple breaks in there after they're at home against Georgetown and Creighton. I think it's DePaul and then Seton Hall, I believe. So hopefully they can. They didn't pull it out at DePaul last year, which was a pretty tough loss for them. But it's always back to back. Then they go Georgetown, Nova back to back, and then they have Butler, Xavier again back to back, followed by Creighton towards the end of their schedule. So it's a pretty tough lineup. It'll be interesting to see how they handle it.
Yeah, and I mean that makes the non-conference games even more important to grab a couple big wins, make a statement, and get some confidence going in, because you get thrown right to the wolves.
Yeah, for sure. And you'd hope that a team like this wouldn't slip up and lose to a Wagner or a Maine, because in years past Providence has had a couple losses to Brown or UMass. It just, you don't want them to slip up early, especially when their Big East schedule suits the way it does.
Yeah,
I think what's intriguing me is I'm looking at their KenPom projections. A lot of their losses, they're not underdogs by much more than like 1 point. Like for the Georgetown and Creighton games at home, they're only favored to lose. I shouldn't say favored. They're behind by only 1 point in both of them. And then even down to their game against Butler, it's only 70-69. So a lot of close calls here.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty accurate projection. I could see this team, whether they finish at the 16-14 projected mark. I could see them being in a majority of these games. So, it's tough with a young team like this. It'll be difficult to finish off those close games. But I could definitely see KenPom projections being accurate in terms of close finishes.
Yeah. All right, I think we could probably move on to our Twitter questions here. Chris, I don't know if you have those up or if you want me to.
I can pull them up.
We can get them real quick here. Let's see. We got to go back a little bit because we were originally supposed to do this Friday. So, where are we at here? All right. From Pat O'Brien, who's the biggest factor if Providence is going to finish above 9th in the Big East? Well, I mean, we talked about it a little bit. I personally would probably pick Rodney Bullock, but I am interested in hearing what you guys think.
I would agree with that. I would definitely say Rodney Bullock, but I think I'll cut it over second. But it's all about the consistency with Rodney Bullock. If the consistency is not there as it hasn't been in the last few years, I think that's going to be a major issue.
Yeah, I would tend to agree. Either Bullock or Cotton, to be honest. That's my pick. I know Providence has been favored by having a lot of good point guards come through them the past few years between Cotton and Dunn, and even going back to Council and such. So I think Cartwright would play a pretty pivotal role if they want to outdo their projections, so to speak.
Yeah. And, I mean, I do think Ryan Physique is going to have a nice scoring role. I just don't think he's built to be a primary scorer.
Yeah, his game is a little bit limited, so to look at him as a primary scorer, I think would be a dangerous idea going into the season.
Next question from Matt Fonts: are the Friars going to get a bigger boost from their incoming freshmen or their incoming transfers?
That's a good one. I don't know. I mean, I think a guy like Isaiah Jackson could really prove to be a solid role player for this team. They're going to look at him and having prior experience in playing for George Mason a couple years ago. I think he's going to be looked at as an experienced guy that could really help him out. And they'll look to Khalif Young and Alpha Diallo, I think, as well. And Emmett Holt is in the same situation as Isaiah Jackson, having minimal Division I experience. But I think I think they should look more towards the transfers. But I think if they can get the freshmen to have some consistent contributions, I think that would be huge for them.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and the thing about a guy like Isaiah Jackson, he's been around the program for a year already. So, I mean, he's got that advantage too.
Yeah, that's definitely a huge advantage.
Yeah, I mean, I'll kind of just follow in what you guys have said. I think it just really depends on how deep Cooley wants to go into his bench, how he wants to utilize his freshmen. I think that banking on the guys who have experience in Holt and Jackson and such will probably be a safer bet. But I could see a scenario where Diallo and Young and Malik White all make substantial impacts and help the Friars along here in this upcoming season.
Yeah. From Zach Jewell, what are realistic expectations for this team?
That's a tough one. You said Ken Baum had 16-14 was his projected record?
Yeah, not including the tournaments and whatnot.
Right.
But
I think that's relatively accurate. I would project around 17 or 18. I'd give them the bias boost. But I would think somewhere around 17 wins would be accurate. Hope assuming there's no injuries and the depth can play to Cooley's advantage.
Yeah, I mean, I think definitely over 500, somewhere between over 500 and 20 wins. Yeah,
I would agree. Depending on how they fare in the Big East tournament and how they fare in the Emerald Coast Classic, that's what it's called, right?
Yeah. Yep.
So depending on all that, there are opportunities for them to win some games. It really all just depends on how they compensate for the losses of Dunn and Bento. I don't think that this is an under 500 roster, and so I don't think that they're going to finish under 500 this year. I'd be shocked if they did. They'd have to have something go very south very quickly, or get battered by injuries. So I think that this is a roster that can compete. They just, they may be just in that lower tier of the Big East standings, but I don't think they're going to finish ninth or anything ridiculous like that. So around 17 wins is probably about right, and then getting up to maybe 18 or 19 in with a win or two in the Big East tournament sounds fair to me.
That might be it for questions, but let me see here. Yep, that is it for questions. So, Chris, you got any closing thoughts here?
No, I think that about covers it. I think I'm excited to watch, Ed Cooley and his staff deal with some depth that they've been lacking over the last couple of years. So it'll be interesting to see how he handles a probably less talented roster, but definitely a deeper roster. So that will be interesting to watch going forward. And this is a pretty solid incoming class, a freshman and a nice group of transfers as well. So I think he'll use that to his advantage, and I think it really comes down to guys like Jalen Lindsey and Rodney Bullock finding consistency in their game and being consistent contributors for the Friars. And I think that's going to determine the outcome of this season for Cooley and his guys.
All right. You got any recommendations for things to do in Providence?
Ooh, that's a tough one. You got to go to Federal Hill. It's close to the Dunkin' Donuts Center, so you can grab an Italian meal. I'm sure if you've ever been to a game there, you've done that. But that'd be my main one. Go to Federal Hill and get a nice Italian meal before going to watch Ed Cooley and his guys play.
All right. Well, thanks for joining us. We'll definitely have you back on at some point this year. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, guys.
Yep.
No problem. All right.
That was Chris Grenham of BigEastCoastBias.com. Follow his writings and stuff. He does a lot of Providence stuff for us.
Yeah, plenty of it.
Yep. Yeah, and I mean, I think it's going to be tough to gauge where I think Providence and Georgetown are the two teams where I don't think I'd be surprised where they finish anywhere between like 4 and 8 or 9.
I would agree with that. I would agree with that entirely. I mean, you don't expect a team with as many juniors as Georgetown does, and as much experience to finish pretty low. But as we've seen, they can be very, very inconsistent. So,
yeah, and I mean, I'm pretty convinced that your top 3 is going to be Villanova and then Xavier and Creighton in some order.
I would agree.
And I'm pretty convinced that DePaul's probably going to be 10. So it's kind of like last year where you're left with 6 teams for anywhere from 4 to 9.
Exactly.
So yeah, I mean, we'll see. Again, I wouldn't want to go bet against Ed Cooley. I mean, he's won 20 games, 3 straight years now? Yeah.
I believe so.
Won 19 in the his second year there. He went 15, 19, 23, 22, 24. So,
yep. I wouldn't want to bet against him.
He knows what he's doing.
Exactly.
All right. I think that's all in terms of Providence talk. We're going to shift gears here to the wrestling and baseball portion of the program.
Don't you have a lot to say today?
I think we're going to start with wrestling because the Providence Civic Center, as it were, very historic wrestling venue.
Very historic wrestling venue. But there was something that happened, or that was supposed to happen, that I believe never wound up happening back in January of 2015. If I'm not mistaken, was it supposed to be at that event? You know what I'm talking about.
What? The
Oh, no, never mind. That was in Connecticut.
Yeah.
You know what I'm talking about, when they got snowed in.
Yeah.
That was in Connecticut. Damn, I thought that was in Providence. Well, I know that Providence hosted a Raw after Money in the Bank in 2013. That much I know.
At the last Raw before the draft this year.
No. Actually, that was a SmackDown because they were in Brooklyn.
But had a bunch of King of the Rings in a row in the late '80s because wrestling was still kind of finding its footing back then, so they stuck in the Northeast.
Providence also did they? No, wait. I'm trying to think.
The Royal Rumble in 1994. The first Backlash.
Good.
Yeah. The Dunk has seen some stuff, man.
Dunk has seen plenty of stuff. I got Providence Civic Center mixed up with the Hartford Civic Center. I thought that they were the one that hosted that terrible WrestleMania.
Yeah, no. So yeah, the Dunk has seen some stuff. Looks like a nice place. Named after Dunkin' Donuts, who is the unofficial sponsor of this program.
It is. As it were.
So yeah, that's. I would like to get to Providence. Providence and Omaha are my two biggie cities that I haven't been to that I would like to. Actually, the only two that I haven't been to. Thinking about it.
Yeah,
right?
No, that's accurate. Same here. So
New York, Newark, Rosemont, Indy.
You've been to Philly.
Philly counts technically.
Yeah.
Milwaukee.
Yep.
One. Yeah. So Omaha and I haven't been to DC.
Oh yeah, me neither. So.
I've heard good things, but I think Providence and Omaha are the two that I would really like to try and get to.
Yes.
But yeah, man, baseball.
Like I said, don't you have a lot to say today?
Yeah, I do. The Cleveland made the World Series, which I think we both kind of predicted from the start. And the Cubs also made the World Series, which I think we kind of both predicted from the start also.
Yeah, no, definitely.
So some torture is going to end one way or another.
I honestly think that and I talked about this on Twitter, but if it comes down to starting pitching, the Indians haven't faced a rotation like the Cubs has. And they just haven't throughout the entire postseason. That's not to take away from anything that they've done because they've been very impressive. But
Yeah.
Boston doesn't come up to snuff, nor does Toronto. Toronto's best starter this year was like J.A. Happ or Marco Estrada. Marco Estrada is not that good,
no,
as he was last year. And the Red Sox, I mean, Porcello was all right, but Porcello benefited greatly from the fact that he had like almost 7 runs of support every time that he went out for a start.
Which is not exaggeration. I thought it was when I saw it originally.
No, I thought it was too, but it wasn't. That's not an exaggeration. He led the league in run support.
I don't want to sound biased, but I have a hard time seeing that John Lester and John Lackey, who you signed for the postseason and who have been, essentially dominant. I mean, Lackey, hasn't as much, except he, game 5, or game 4,
game 4.
He was as good as he needed to be. And then Kyle Hendricks again. And it doesn't even take into account that, the guy who won the Cy Young last year still hasn't been as dominant as he could be.
Exactly. He's due for a good start. Like, he's definitely due for a good start. And he was okay against San Francisco in Game 3 of the NLDS. He wasn't perfect, but he was okay.
Yeah.
From what I remember, at least. And he's due for a really good start. Kyle Hendricks has been great. John Lester has been downright dominant this entire postseason.
Which is incredible.
Yeah, he might be, putting together one of the all-time great postseasons. His stuff has been outstanding. So, and obviously Cleveland has an edge in the bullpen, but not to sound like Captain Obvious here, but if it doesn't get to the bullpen, then it doesn't matter.
Well, yeah, exactly.
And I know that they have Andrew Miller and he's been great, and they might be adding Salazar to it if he gets that done and he's able to pitch or whatever. But you can have as many weapons in the bullpen as you want, but they're trotting out pretty much a 3-man starting rotation with Kluber, Bauer, and Tomlin. I mean, they might go Merritt if Game 4's if they have a lead in the series.
Yeah.
But even then, it's like I think the Cubs just have too big of an advantage. And like I said, sure, if it gets to the bullpen, Cleveland obviously has an advantage in the fact that they have guys who can give them a lot of mileage and whatnot. But the Cubs starters have been really good. They can probably shut down that lineup. And the Cubs lineup is, they're getting into it. They're off the schneid. And if you think about it, the only times that the Cubs have lost this postseason were in a fluky, weird-ass extra inning game in San Francisco, and that they battled in for quite a while. And the best pitcher in the world shut them down, and then Rich Hill happened.
Yeah.
And that's it. Other than that, they've gone out and they've scored a bunch of runs. They've had a bunch of big innings, and it's worked for them. So to suggest the fact that, that anything could change now, especially against probably a weaker pitching staff than they've faced throughout this entire postseason, really. I mean, yes, I know Corey Kluber is very good, but aside from that, Trevor Bauer is all right, but, hopefully his finger's healed up. And, I think that they can beat Josh Tomlin. And
Trevor Bauer, though, he's the type of pitcher that the Cubs are going to sit and wait out because he's never in control.
Exactly. And if the Cubs force them to go to that bullpen early while good, get as much mileage as you need out of that because, at some point, the arms are going to be burnt out at some point for as good as they are.
I mean, speaking of bullpens, did you have a problem with what Dave Roberts was doing?
I
mean, if you were going to go to Kenley for that long anyway, why not do it before Rizzo homered?
I didn't understand leaving Clayton out there to, hung out to dry. I didn't. And I know that he was good, but it was so obvious that he did not have his right stuff. So obvious from the jump.
No, I think when it got to be probably 3-0, you probably could have taken him out. I mean, before Contreras.
Damn, I know, but the bullpen the Dodgers had was good. It's just the fact that they'd been stretched out so much, and eventually those arms just die out. And the Cubs, to their credit, they pounced on them.
Yeah.
And you had guys like, Joe Blanton, who had a really good year, but he was just used so much. And by the time October rolled around and the series rolled around, he had nothing left.
Yeah.
So that's the thing about, bullpens. They're good, but problem is if they're used too much going forward, it's going to come to a point where there's just nothing left. And that's what, that's obviously what did the Mets in last year because Familia was overused so much and he had nothing left by the time the World Series came around. Same thing happened this year too with him. I mean, he used so much, he had 50 saves or whatever, but that's a lot.
Yeah.
When you use that much as a crutch, something's got to give at some point. You can't, do it forever. There's only a couple, situations like Mariano Rivera when you're able to do it so good for so long, but that's the exception, not the rule.
Personally, I don't think the Cubs are going to lose a home game. So if they can win tomorrow or Wednesday.
Yeah. If the Cubs starters are on and if the offense keeps going the way that it's going right now, this will be a fun series, but it's going to be a short one.
Yeah.
Right now, I'm tentatively thinking about it. Right now, I think Cubs in 5 would not shock me, and I wouldn't even be shocked if they swept. This might have 04 Red Sox written all over it when they took down a 105 win Cardinals team in 4 games.
Yeah, but that Cardinals team had no chance.
No, of course they didn't. But I mean, same thing might happen here. Indians might not have a chance now. So, I know Cleveland's been good, and I'm not diminishing anything. They have a lot of good players, but they just might be running into a buzzsaw.
I mean, it's crazy that we're even talking about the Cubs and Indians both being in the World Series at the same time. So, I mean, and it's crazy that the Cubs-Dodgers series turned around because of a bunt and Matt Caesar's bat.
Yeah. Which Villanova continues to have the best year ever.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't be surprised if they were undefeated heading into 2017.
Again, Matt Caesar, minutes after they won the national title, 3-run double.
Yep.
And then the next night he started and homered. So, I mean, we've been on it all year.
Exactly.
So, we should be back sometime later this week talking about who is left. Butler?
I think Butler would be next, right?
Butler sounds right. I think VJ's coming on for that.
Yep, Butler's next.
Supposed to be on for DePaul, and some stuff got in the way, so Butler probably sometime this week, and then
Seton Hall. We'll probably have Sean on for that.
Yep, Seton Hall, Xavier, Villanova, and
I don't know what we're gonna have for those ones, but
then the famous NCAA season preview with if we can get Pierce on, Alex. Maybe we could drag Mike Murtaugh back from his real job.
Yep.
So it'll be fun. We got a lot of fun coming. As always, thanks for listening to us, etc. Appreciate it, especially if you listen all the way to this point.
Yep.
So yeah, we're gonna go now.
Yep. Thank you for tuning in. We'll as Rob said, we'll be back later this week. And keep reading Big East Coast Bias. We've got some more DePaul stuff coming. We've got more St. John's stuff coming this week. Also, season previews are on the way. So be sure to keep it dialed in because it's only going to ramp up from here because college basketball is right around the corner.
Yeah. See ya.